nights, coffee houses, clubs, and neon lights. I rock the people my way, working my way, coming back to you. Working my way, coming back. Take me home tonight, not wasting any time. Highway 95, engines on overdrive. From town to town, and in between, I see you in the morning light. New York, Boston, Philadelphia, LA, I still see your face. Buses roll, distance grows, but I remember you're just a dream away. Working my way, coming back to you. Working my way, coming back. Take me home tonight, not wasting any time. Highway 95, engines on overdrive. From town to town, and in between, I see you in the morning light. Keep the light on as I drive on, singing our song. Keep the light on as I drive on, singing our song. Take me home tonight, not wasting any time. Highway 95, engines on overdrive. From town to town, and in between, I see you in the morning light. Take me home tonight, not wasting any time. Highway 95, engines on overdrive. From town to town, and in between, I see you in the morning light. Take me home tonight, not wasting any time. Highway 95, engines on overdrive. From town to town, and in between.
All right, folks, good afternoon. Welcome to What Are the Odds with Barnes and Baris. I am one half of that, Rich Baris, the People's Pundit. Robert will be joining us soon. We're going to have some early results, some unweighted, but still some early results of the public polling project for late spring, early summer 2021. And we're also going to be talking about how I think we all see, which Robert pointed out some really interesting results in some polling and watching the trends in Europe, that I think is just a blowback to some of this lockdown stuff. Generally, Democrats and leftists in general have really positioned themselves with the lockdown parties, the pro-lockdown parties, and it looks like it's hurting them pretty much everywhere. If, that's a big if, the right can take advantage of it. All right, so first and foremost, the idea of where this virus originated from, and that the world was told that this virus originated from a wet market, a bat, some crazy animal wet market, and not a laboratory in Wuhan, China. All right, let me just say this right off the bat. I don't have to wait to tell you that nobody believes this anymore. A very, very, very small population is clinging to the idea that this thing didn't come from a lab and that they're sure about it, unless you show them concrete evidence. So the very likely it didn't come from, or very unlikely crowd is very tiny. The somewhat unlikely crowd is very tiny. And the vast majority of Americans now believe what Donald Trump told them months and months and months and months, a year ago or so. If you remember, look, before I show you this, it's important to remember that you couldn't even say this back then. That it was racist. You couldn't call it the Wuhan virus or the Chinese virus. You were racist if you did that. Xenophobic. And that there was no evidence that it did. Dr. Fauci, thank you to his email dump, collaborated with big tech and big media to mute the voices of dissent that were credible and what may even have been a majority opinion. But because only those who were lockstep with the pro-Beijing talking points were allowed to get on TV, were allowed to keep their social media accounts, were allowed to stream on YouTube, we had to be told this dupe, along with the mass dupe and the lockdown dupe, for over a year. And now, despite CNN doing everything they can to, tell the world that Dr. Fauci was just trying to look out for them and get rid of misinformation that may be coming from the White House, it's also important to note that, despite all of that, Americans still largely don't believe it. And also, one more thing, that the idea that Republican senators and Republicans on any side of the aisle would have kept up with this wet market theory for so long, when this intelligence you're hearing about from the Wall Street Journal over the last few weeks that really broke everybody's worldview for a little bit there. For those of you who have been writing columns and saying, this will do a really damage to my trust and my confidence in the public health, the white coat class, right? Let me just tell you right away, they had this information for a long time. The Wall Street Journal may now be reporting this, but the Trump administration had conducted investigations, had been an open investigation for a while. And the bulk of the intelligence before Donald Trump left the White House was from the State Department. And despite it, whatever you want to call it, it's maybe secret, whatever, they would tell anyone who would listen. The media simply wanted to lie to you for a long time. And now Americans just aren't buying it. And I guess I got this logged into, the shot with Robert. So I'll put it in a single, though, and we'll look at it together because I want to show it to you. All right, let's pull up Lab Leak. Again, it's not weighted, but it really doesn't need to be. The raw sample is about D+9, folks. So there is some weighting that needs to be done. It does tilt Metro. All right, so we shouldn't at all be surprised by some of the the raw data results, as it always does. We oversampled rural America this time because of what we found in the last two surveys, which is that even the rural sample was just too liberal. All right, so participation skews towards the liberal mind in these surveys. So we think now we got a little bit better grasp on what's going on, especially when you look at people who are uncomfortable sharing their views, all right? So let me not be one of those YouTubers, and let me put this up, all right? Please tell us whether, or regardless of whether it was intentional or a leak, how likely do you think it is that SARS-CoV-2, the coronavirus that causes COVID-19, originated in a lab in Wuhan, China? This is raw, again, raw, all right? 44% very likely. 23% somewhat likely. Somewhat unlikely is barely under 10, is just under 10%, rounding, right? And very unlikely is 7%. So not even, because this, when I weight this, it's just a reality that more conservatives, if you look at this by ideology, conservatives and moderates are more likely than liberals to believe that this did originate in a lab. So, liberals are not nearly 30% of the electorate. When we wait for geographic when we put in the geographic weighting variable. It's going to change the ideological component as it does with party. And that's part of the magic sauce, all right? You don't have to touch party. You definitely don't have to touch ideology. If you wait for everything else that you need to wait for and you have a representative sample, those things are going to work out. But you can clearly see that nobody in this country believes this came from a wet market anymore. So for the media to continue with their ridiculous talking points is just that it's Hitchcock Twilight Zone stuff. They're talking to themselves. Nobody believes it. And here, just so you guys can get rid of that, I'll pop that logo out of the way. Someone's like, hey, can I see this? Yeah, you can. This is exactly how the question is worded. All right? There you go. It's gone. I mean, obviously, guys, you can clearly see it is a very tiny population. So Republican senators, shame on you. Shame on you for even entertaining this already, because I assume that you were privileged to the intelligence. And let me just break everybody else's worldview even more here, break their brains a little bit more. This intelligence does go one step further. It does. There are elements in the intelligence community who do believe it was intentional. But this was the appropriate, fair way to pose this question to the American public. Regardless of whether it's a leak, was intentional or not, intentional or a leak. How likely, just overall, how likely is it? I'm going to go ahead and say, it's always hard to tell. And you never want to spit out numbers. Then people hold you to it. But it very likely will at least rise by a few points, modestly. Somewhat likely is going to rise by a few points. And unlikelies are going to go down. That's going to happen when weighting goes in, when it gets put into play here. A couple other things I want to talk to you about while we wait for Robert, just generally off the bat. Everyone wants to know what's Biden's approval rating looking like. Severe, or I would say significant dissatisfaction with how Joe Biden handled the cyber attacks definitely hurt him. So even though he went up in the economy in our polling a little bit, which is funny to me, but he did go up a little bit, even though some of the registered voter economic confidence index stuff is not good, which we shouldn't be surprised. Underwhelming data everywhere. He ticked up a little bit on the economy. He's still doing very poor on immigration and China, U.S.-China relations, foreign policy. He's not doing great on foreign policy. He's not doing horrible on foreign policy, but he's not doing great. He's still flying high with COVID. The problem for him is The problem for him is we didn't even have to ask about most important issue in this poll. We're not there yet. Voting is a ways away. So we have some time to go. But I can tell you from other district level polling and polling in other areas, it's district and state, coronavirus as a voting issue is now taking a backseat to other things. The economy is again becoming very important. We're going to start to phrase way of life issues because, according to some of these results, people are seeing things in their, way of life is a way to put it. So their ability to speak freely, their ability to do what they want with their children, right? So if people feel like they're being assaulted here. Their way of life is being assaulted. A lot of this, again, it's not a bunch of Republicans just screaming about how unhappy they are with the Biden administration. This is across the board. I mean, the Democrats are, of course, going to circle the wagon a lot more, but independents and Republicans and generally moderates don't like some of the stuff we're seeing. In the raw, critical race theory went down in a blaze of glory. And when I mean a blaze of glory, it is negative 40 plus points. So when we ask people, children, all right, which best reflects your view on education, and we ask them and we give them the critical race theory, definition, children should be, the traditional. Children should be taught to be merit-based, racially colorblind, and capable of being whomever they want if they work hard, not that they are disadvantaged based on the color of their skin. Or children should be taught that the only way to truly overcome racism is to acknowledge U.S. society, laws, and institutions are inherently racist, and some are disadvantaged no matter what they do. That is negative 40 plus, folks. And I'm saying 40 plus because that is the situation right now. It could wait, and I only see it getting worse. So I don't see it being, negative 40 even. It's going to be in a blaze of glory. In a blaze of glory. All right, we can confirm some of those suspicions that more people are homeschooling their children. If we only look at some of the other data that's available out there, not household surveys, actual attendance, it does look like about 12% do homeschool their children now, which is an increase, and that another 2.5-3%, and this is raw, again, it could be higher, are considering pulling their children out of public schools. Interestingly, by the way, there is a small fraction of the country, about 3%, who have children who attend both public and private, 18 or under. All right, look, Robert's here. I'm just going to stop and bring him in because I don't want him to miss any of this. All right, so let me bring him in. I do see tomorrow, looks like I'll be on What America Thinks on the Hill to talk about this. All right, so first, though, we're going to talk about it with Robert. All right, let me bring on Robert. All right, can you hear me, my friend? Thanks for joining us, as always. How we doing? All right, did you get a chance to hear some of what we were saying, Robert, I'll go back over it, and I'm just trying to get you in this other camera here, but yeah, I mean, critical race theory, Robert, is negative 40 plus points. As giving people a choice, what do you think we should teach our children, and giving them the definition and why. And by the way, we went to academia and we said, how could this be fairly polled? And I submitted a question to them that I thought was already fair. They insisted I change it to say that in order to truly, overcome racism, that is why we want to teach these things. And I did that. And we did, in fact, change it to reflect. And they thought that would have some kind of grand, impact on it or something. It's negative 40 plus. Overall, and here, I'll bring up the Wuhan question here. 44 almost percent of the country think it's very likely it came from a lab. Another quarter say it's somewhat likely. Only less than 8% of the country, Robert, is hanging on to this came from a wet market and a bat. Nobody believes this crap anymore. I don't know, man. I mean, you tell me. Where you see what's going on. Where do we go from here with the media, man? They're just incredible.
Well, I think it does show the blown opportunity that Trump had. Some of us were telling him then, and he was onto it initially, think about it. The political pitch would have been, look, he's not going to ever win the soft pandemic guy. He was never going to, that was a natural Democratic edge. Where he could flip the script was to say, this is about China developing bioweapons trying to hurt America one more time. And imagine if he'd run on that. I mean, he'd be in the White House right now beyond any doubt. He wouldn't have had to rely on the other side getting within the margin of fraud to pull it off. I mean, this is another indicator, and I hope he shows some signs of realizing this, but hopefully he realizes it in more fully now. He took a lot of bad advice the last year he was in the White House. That bad advice cost him the White House, more so, frankly, than the Election Act, because that would have removed the possibility of any election issues impacting the election ultimately. He would have been outside of the margin of fraud, where he was in January before all these issues percolated up. And so hopefully he's maybe learning that lesson. But it's great news that the American people are what this is a sign of is the scientific establishment, the government establishment, the medical establishment, the news media gatekeepers are no longer able to keep the truth from the American people, because this was quickly uncovered and discovered. And if you dig into I forget if you did some polling on this back earlier in the year, but there were a large number of Republicans that already believed this. It was Democrats and independents who were still trusting the media. And now they realize, I mean, Thomas Frank, good piece in The Guardian, said this totally shocks the entire Democratic liberal establishment because we were convinced that it was only the idiot conspiracy theorists. It was only the crazies like Alex Jones saying this, even though Alex Jones's source was Francis Boyle, the leading bioweapons lawyer in America and one of the biggest ones in the world, who was saying this in February of last year. And now, I mean, this is going to be one of the greatest examples. It used to be Epstein and some other examples. This is going to be the biggest example of how the institutional media, the institutional medical establishments, the institutional government cannot be trusted on anything. They will lie about the most they will tell the most egregious and damaging lies. And what they're not really, their media is only half admitting this. This is about beating Trump. They hid this story because they knew the truth would help Trump. And that's why they lied about it. So this was another form of fraud on the American people and fraud on the election. Though, again, Trump could have done a lot more to fight back against it had he not taken so much bad advice. And I know he's told people privately he recognizes that. I would like to see a little more public recognition of it, frankly. But I'd like to see signs of better advisors than some of the people he's had. And
what you mean, Robert, is that if he didn't take their advice, why he would have been beyond the margin of fraud, it wouldn't matter. It wouldn't even be an issue, is because they wouldn't have gotten all of these changes. It wouldn't have mattered. It would have been like 2016, 2012, 2008, like every other election in this country.
Exactly. I mean, people forget is the reason why Bush won in 2004 and Obama won in 2012 was the disparate intensity led to disparate turnout, which gave them the edge. We now know from the election that Trump had that natural edge. They were only able to counter it by rigging the rules and changing the rules. And if they not changed the rules of the game, they were going to lose pretty easily, pretty soundly. Trump was going to win by a bigger margin than 2016. And had he focused, the only thing that made him vulnerable was his fear of the pandemic's outcome, which led him to go along with the lockdowns, which gave the political pretext for these rule changes to even occur on the scale that they occurred in, and it hurt him in the court of public opinion that he only started bouncing back in October because he was never going to win. This was my argument with Will Chamberlain and others. Republicans are never, it's like healthcare. Republicans are never going to, nobody's going to think fundamentally that Republicans are fundamentally more sympathetic, empathetic than Democrats on certain issues.
Never going to happen.
Give that up. What they will believe is that you're more financially sound. On that issue, you can find angles, and so in the pandemic, no one was going to think that Trump is the best bedside manner person in the world. If your relative was about to die, you're not going to hire Donald Trump to come in and sweet talk him. But Joe Biden doesn't know where he's at, so why not? So that was never a winner. But how he could have converted that into a winner is to make it a national security issue where he was very strong, to make it a China Communist Party issue where he was very strong, to make this about they not only want to steal our jobs, they want to take away the lives of our elderly by spreading a bioweapon, by taking deliberate steps. And right now they're talking about being a lab leak. Let's be honest. There's a lot more reason, given what happened with China, to believe it was a little more than a lab leak.
And Robert, that's what the intelligence. Look, I was saying before, it even goes. This intelligence. It was about beating Donald Trump. It was because the State Department, which had the vast majority of this early intelligence when Donald Trump was still in office, conducting the investigation, they had it, and they told everybody who would listen. The media hid it on purpose. We knew it. We heard it. Everybody knew. They just didn't tell. And now we're at the point where actually the lean is that it wasn't a leak, that it was intentional. It was. Because they're just not ready to publicly tell anybody.
That's what these labs are for. That's why I got guns, germs, and steel behind me on the weapons. Germs have always been a weapon. They've always changed the political equation. They're not doing gain-of-function research for defensive purposes. They're doing gain-of-function research for offensive purposes. What you do is you take a virus, you make it more transmittable and more lethal, and then that's step two is you try to make it either you create a vaccine already for it or a treatment already for it, or you tinker with it in such a way that it won't disproportionately hurt your own population, but will disproportionately hurt other populations.
An enemy. Yeah.
And then you look at what they did. People assume that China was just lying about the data. What if they were never lying about the data? What if the lie was the big shutdown they did at the get-go to make it look so scary and terrifying that the rest of the world would shut down? Because you look at it economically, China benefited tremendously from this. I mean, this was a windfall for China economically, also for big tech. But for China, you can look at those GDP stats. I think you were showing them a couple of weeks ago. I mean, China's up at like 20%. And other people are, and most everyone else is in the red, especially if you factor out the government. If you look at private sector economies in the West, it was negative. And now we have inflation on top of all that. China gained a major edge in the supply networks because that was the second pitch that we made to Trump. One, make this all about national security and the Chinese Communist Party, really waging an active war on the United States. Second, to use it to say we need to bring all key supply chains back to the United States. And there was early talk of Trump doing that, and then he dropped it. And now China actually has a bigger edge in supply chains than it did before the pandemic, which they only could induce by lockdowns. And think about it. What if there wasn't the best evidence this was a bioweapon deliberately released is if China's actually being honest about their death data. Because that means they designed the virus to only impact a very small percentage of its population and designed to impact other populations. Because, by the way, it's not just China. Asian populations in general seem to disproportionately not suffer from this virus. So it would be just like the Chinese Communist Party to design a virus that looks like a Bill Gates wet dream that targets certain racial groups disproportionately.
Even Robert, if they lost, it would be nothing. Even if they lost 100,000, 150,000, it would be nothing for the Chinese to just shave off like you're trimming a brisket. Just shave off the extra fat in your population. They don't give a damn. They would have no problem.
Especially not the elderly. The elderly, they don't care. I mean, this looked like a CCP designed virus. The purpose of which was to release it. And didn't China get everything they wanted? China got the economic edge they wanted. They got rid of Trump like they wanted. Didn't it work perfectly?
Yep. He had them, and that's what we were showing in the show last week. He had them on their knees. They were done. Manufacturing sector was shrinking by double digits. They couldn't hold out for much longer, Robert. And Trump was just on them. Phase two, phase two, phase two. I'm going to win re-election. You want to believe the media polls? Knock yourself out. I'm going to win re-election. Better come back to the table. Doesn't look like your manufacturing sector can take it much longer. And they couldn't. And then this is where the real cynic in me, like you, I always look at who benefits. And the bottom line is they were done. Until this pandemic came out, they were done. All of Trump's enemies were done. All of America's enemies were in deep trouble. Another 4 years, they'd have been done too. I mean, that's it. They could not survive another 4 years of Donald Trump's world order. They just couldn't.
No doubt. I mean, he was on the verge of peace deals throughout the Middle East that were expanding. Yeah. He was doing the Abraham Accords right at the end. That was going to expand even further. He had turned the royals against any form of Islamofascism, so that was expanding. I mean, he was creating a real opportunity for meaningful, lasting, deep peace in the Middle East. He was reversing the Chinese model of trying to be dominant, collusion with big tech around the world. He was giving the opportunity to restore American industry more broadly. And he was winning other political battles in other political arenas, including how Europe was looked at, Latin America was looked at, how immigration was looked at, had Mexico on board with the U.S. on immigration. All of these things that got ripped away because of this model. So there are a lot of people who profited, but nobody more than China. And that's the fingerprints, the forensic fingerprints of culpable intent. Maybe this lab leak wasn't just negligent.
Yeah, and that's why you have Donald Trump so confident. Because he was told a lot of this before he left. He was so confident. Like, look, I think they need to pay $10 trillion. And they have to pay $10 trillion. Rand Paul is calling what Fauci did criminal. And honestly,
It is.
I know it is criminal.
Fauci
Robert,
lied
you're the
to him.
lawyer. Is what he did is reading his emails, which sadly probably not enough Americans have done yet. All right, don't wait for Fox News to tell you what is in these emails, ladies and gentlemen, because Fox News helped get rid of Donald Trump too, and they pushed the pandemic lockdown panic like everybody else. Don't wait for CNN, that's for damn sure. Don't wait for anybody. You could read these dumps on your own. If you're a mask wearer and you believe Dr. Fauci's latest version of masks, you've been duped. Just get over it. Grow and move forward. If you believed that lockdown was a consensus, you've been duped. All right. I mean, it's his emails are so bad. The gain of function stuff, Robert. The gain of function is, what could you imagine if the roles were reversed and this was like Atlas who did this or something? Could you? They would have strung him up already, Robert. There'd be gallows on Pennsylvania Avenue right now. They'd walk 60 feet across from the executive building and they'd put the man in a noose. There are hundreds of thousands of people dead from something that we likely aided in creating. I mean, so this is look. So what can reading? Because I'm sure you have, and I watched a clip of yours and with Viva the other day. From Viva Barnes, locals.com, vivabarneslaw.locals.com. But seriously, I watched that and you said something because he really can't be held accountable for any of this. The American people can't hold him accountable for what looks like horrible lies that you would never believe any public official would tell you like this. But what he can be held accountable for is lying to Rand Paul under oath, right? So we knew he did that day when we had this show. I played the clip. He lied to Rand Paul under oath. Something has to be done about this.
Well, ideally, something should be done about it. But I think it might be leveraged to get him out. If he was smart, he would have his retirement plan up and going. I think that he knew someone was going to get the FOIA information, and I think that's why he leaked it to, or somebody connected to him leaked it to BuzzFeed to try to soften the blow. It's a classic Washington tactic. The Duran, which is a good show that covers a lot of these issues, plus tons of foreign policy issues that people can find both on YouTube and on Locals. They have their own Locals channel as well. They were talking about this early on, that it looked and they look at things from a global perspective. So they're looking at this. This looks really suspicious. Why is Fauci suddenly being outed now? And what's the backstory here? I suspect it's because Judicial Watch and other people were, or at least one possible explanation. There may be others, but one possible explanation would be that Judicial Watch and others were about to get their hands on those emails. They knew how damning those emails would be. And if people want sort of a guidepost to those emails, there was a good piece in the Epoch Times that explains to you the meaning of it. Because some people are looking at it.
They're not putting it in context. They're not putting it in context.
They're missing that. What's in the article that's being linked and shared, who it is that he's reaching out to immediately set up conference calls to discuss that article. What is it he's worried about? The whole way this unraveled, we've always been doing a lot of this research, but Nixon shut it down in the 70s. It's supposed to be illegal. Francis Boyle got federal law passed in the 80s, the law professor at the University of Illinois, who's been talking about these issues for a quarter century. His number one booster has been Alex Jones. That's how I was introduced to him. He's one of those intellectuals that the institutional press won't allow to be publicly talked about, even though he's a tenured law professor at one of the top law schools in the world. I mean, it gives you a sense for how crazy this is. But and Jones, to his credit, he was the first. I'm telling me this in February of last year. He was like, "Oh no, Barnes, we know it's man-made." And, it's classic Alex. Yeah. So I was like, okay, but how can he be that confident that he's like, I talked to Boyle, I talked to these people, I looked at this, it's related to that. It's your classic, Jones reads these incredible range of sources of information. So, there's the entertainer side of him that people get caught up in. There's the dramatist side of him that people get caught up in. But fundamentally, Jones is just a guy who reads a lot and talks to a lot of interesting people. And when I talked to those people, I talked to Boyle in May of last year, and the interview is still up. He laid it out what the problem was. And it all starts with gain of function research. This is research that has no defensive purpose. We're only supposed to have biological weapons for defensive purposes legally. Gain of function research Just listen to it. Gain of function. How does that
I
sound
know, it's
defensive?
the name, folks. The name. Listen to the name.
Exactly. Is to take a virus that's in the natural world and make it more dangerous and transmittable to humans. Because the big problem with COVID-19 out of the gate was how in the world did this jump so quickly from a bat that's
That's right.
thousands of miles away to a bunch of people in Wuhan? Out of the gate. I mean, I'll give Brett Weinstein credit. Done great to talk about this. He's also talked about alternative therapeutics and the suppression of information related to their medical efficacy. I won't go into detail about it because he got flagged on his YouTube channel for talking about it.
Oh, right, right away. Yeah.
People can go to his Dark Horse podcast. And also, I'm not a scientist. He is. So go to him and listen to what he has to say about this. But he early on just assumed the natural origin source. And somebody responded to him on Twitter and said, well, you do know, is it really a coincidence that this virus would be a bat-originated coronavirus just a few miles from one of the only BS level 4 labs in the world? And Weinstein was like, that is kind of odd. So the
Zero Hedge was removed from Twitter from putting out a story, which was, by the way, I mean, not, poorly sourced. It was just a, hey, like what you just said, hey, what are the odds? Speaking of the show, what are the odds? And by the way, there are some Chinese physicians who are saying this. And he was removed for that, Robert. Right off, gone. That was the final straw for him. It was the lab leak story. Yep. Which may not even be a leak, folks.
Oh, yeah. This smelled like, why do people design a bioweapon? To use it. I mean, that's why. And didn't this work exactly as they wanted to? You release it. You make it sound like it's a random virus and you have no idea where it's from. You lock down your own country with real dramatic videos all over the place. And as the Imperial group in London in UK admitted, the reason why the lockdowns became popular, they said they had no chance at the lockdowns until China did it.
Yeah.
And in fact, China persuaded people that were well-meaning. Jack Posobiec, Mike Cernovich, other people were like, wow, if China's reacting this way, this must be a real dangerous virus. So it worked, didn't it? So, I mean, it was brilliant propaganda. I assumed it had to be a serious virus or China wouldn't do what they were doing. I didn't dawn on me until Francis Boyle started talking. I was like, oh, this could have a totally different dynamic here. And it worked. I mean, it worked to the nth degree. They got the whole rest of the world to shut down. Well, within a month or two, they were holding parties in Wuhan, public parties in Wuhan. They're doing concerts in Wuhan by the summer. And while the rest of us are, all shaking in our houses.
Crawling under rocks. Right.
Exactly.
Right.
This has all the evidence of being deliberate. And Trump should just continue to escalate against China. We should investigate whether China did this deliberately. It ties into the election and what they were doing. He was the probably target numero uno of this. I mean, no
joke. Look, Robert, he's got to know this because I think about the media role in all of this and why they must know things, why they don't report them if I can find out. And I did get lucky in a couple sources that we had. That's how I was ahead, and we were ahead over here on the progress of the vaccine because of those sources. Right off the jump, they told the government, and the government was like, you know what, let's just not make this public yet. But they were going to go with the antigen method first. You had Moderna, who is mRNA. Those are Fauci's friends, by the way. They are trying to push mRNA vaccines, which are not. This is it, folks. This is the first time we've ever done this. Vaccines are not the same as the ones we are seeing with COVID, the vaccines you all know about. So when Fauci makes a claim like, well, we know from, the history that if there's going to be a major problem with a vaccine, it's going to happen right away or generally in the short term. That's not true because that is an antigen method vaccine. And the truth is we don't know anything about mRNA vaccines in the mid to long term. We just don't because we've never done it. And right off the bat, another company told the government, told the White House, there's no way they didn't tell other members of the media that they could not go with the antigen method and they must do what other companies like Moderna are doing because this thing needs to be stripped down. It's not natural and it did not come from nature. They told us that in the spring of it was almost immediately when Warp Speed got off the ground, before Speed got off the ground. You had all these companies. They knew they had to make a move if they wanted a piece of this pie that was going to come out of the government. So they acted early. This goes back so early. It's incredible to me that the Faucis and the media figures and honestly why like the Donald Trumps and others around him don't just come out and say, look, I was president at the time. I know what they told me. This thing wasn't made. This thing's not natural. It did not come from nature. So they know it, and they're afraid. They were afraid because I did ask our trusted and obviously reliable sources. We even had the dates to the T on emergency use authorization. So obviously, they said they were afraid the government would discriminate against them. They were told not to say anything. And if they did, that they may lose out on a slice of the pie. They didn't want to rock the boat, man. So they were told to shut up, and they were just going to shut up, and that was it. And they did. And they just shut up and they moved forward. But they knew right away that this thing was not natural. The minute they tried to deconstruct and figure out how to do the antigen method, didn't work.
And that's the whole legacy of Trump's presidency in terms of its vulnerabilities was going between corrupted insiders and crazy outsiders, and not finding the balance in between, finding the smart outsiders. He had some, but he didn't consistently listen to them, unfortunately. Yeah, and so the corrupt insiders led him astray on everything related to the lockdowns, which basically was the defining factor of his presidency in terms of re-election. Without that, he easily gets re-elected without doubt. Because of it, it put his presidency, his re-election at risk, and it could get within the margin of fraud. And the other aspect is, and some of it was he attached the outsider beliefs that were really strategic and smart to crazy outsiders when there's a big difference between the two. There's a difference between smart Steve Bannon style insight and the, Mike Lindell falling off his rocker insight, or Patrick Byrne doing his thing, or Lynn Wood doing his thing. And the inability to distinguish between them was a strategic weakness. People like Roger Stone are on the outside, but most of the insight they're going to provide is strategically savvy. Same with Steve Bannon, same with a range of us that were in that same category. And he had people around him like that, and he was aggregating more and more of them. That's why his second term was set up to be very successful. He had put people in charge of policy personnel that were really quite sharp. Unfortunately, that has not translated so far to his post-presidency, as far as I can tell. I mean, Jason Miller is a complete idiot. I mean, look at that blog idea. We said from the get-go that was not that was not the best path to pursue. And he had to shut it down within a month because it was getting very little traction at all. He still has too many bad advisors that led him astray back then. I had a debate 2 weeks ago with the little neo-Nazi Nick Fuentes, and I actually had to have discussion with so-called polling experts who did not understand the populist movement being associated with open, brazen racists is not a good idea. I was shocked. Real American Politics should delete his YouTube account and his Twitter account. If you're so dumb, you think hanging out with neo-Nazis is a good idea, and that's a popular method, because, look at the polling on issues like immigration.
Go ahead. I was going to say we have a cool.
Yeah, we'll go to the
show
Palestine
people.
Israel.
Tell me when you're ready. Yeah.
But to give people, Nick Fuentes has said women shouldn't participate in politics. He said white women sleeping with black men is as degenerate as sleeping with the dog. He compared the Holocaust to baking cookies and said there couldn't be enough of them. This is not someone who should ever be taken seriously. He's just a bigot. He's another David Duke. In the history of populism, on the left or the right, is that when the fascistic side co-ops their movement, one of two things happens. Either one, they discredit the populist movement by their association, or they take over and wipe out the populist movement when they seize power. In either circumstance, the populist movement loses. There's no history.
Jaw down here because I didn't know that, man. I didn't hear. I don't follow him. The first time I think I heard of him is when you did the debate with him. I don't really know that.
To draw attention to who he was, because there were
Laura
some people.
Said she did. Laura just went. I did.
We went through this with the alt-right, and we had some friends of ours dancing around with the alt-right. Said, "Don't be near those people. They're neo-Nazis. They're racist. Stay away from them." And they got burned by their association, and it was a foolish thing to do. And this goes back to Trump with Charlottesville. Now, they have always lied about what Trump said related to Charlottesville, but some of us had been telling Trump's people and Trump to take certain corrective actions to make clear he has nothing to do with those people. And he decided not to, because he took the bait one of the reasons why we complain about people being mislabeled racist and mislabeled Nazi is because there are actual Nazis and actual racists out there. And they won't be identified as such because so many other people have been mislabeled it. Nick Fuentes is a little neo-Nazi David Duke wannabe racist. That's who he is. He says, and I was trying to explain someone to, they're like, well, he could still be a popular pitch to do this. And I was like, do you understand that if I was a proponent of open borders, I would want to hold up Nick Fuentes as its opponent, because he says immigration is all about keeping the brown people out. That's not a good immigration pitch. The immigration pitch, in fact, where our populist movement is working right now on the right, Latino voters. The Romney, the old Republican
saving
obsession.
Texas, saving Florida, and damn near saved Arizona. But the McSallys don't appeal to them because a McSally kind of candidate. That's not because
it's what we've been saying for years. We're appeal to Latino voters based on common class and cultural interest, because they're working class voters disproportionately and they're culturally conservative voters. And what happened, that was the biggest success of Trump's first term, was the massive inroads and opening door amongst working class Hispanic voters. It's why Florida wasn't close. It was because of how dominant he was in Miami. I mean, it was a 25 point swing in precincts in Miami toward Trump from 2016 to 2020. And these people are saying, let's saddle up with the guy who says immigration's about keeping the brown people out, because that's a smart political strategy. That's real American politics. I previously said positive things about him. I retract all of them. The guy's an idiot. Don't do polling analysis. Don't do political analysis. You're too stupid to be on public display. When you're really dumb, people, you should keep your mouth shut. That way people don't know you're stupid. That's an advantage.
I didn't know that stuff, but I did hear something in your debate that set off both of Laura and I's alarm. And all of our people in locals were like, wait a minute, did you hear that? Did he mean it like that? And he said, when you brought up Western civilization and how Israelis are really, while they're obviously in the Middle East, and, there's the Old Testament, there's the New Testament. The bottom line is they have the most in common with Westerns. He said, well, Jews aren't really a part of the history of Western civilization. He did that thing that is neo-Nazi. It's when you separate Europe from Jews in Southern Europe. And
he said America would be better off if Israel didn't exist. Said Islamofascism wasn't a problem. Said Islam is more pro-Christian than Judaism. Israel's been faking it for 75 years.
Robert, there's the Western civilization that comes from the Greco-Roman, the Hellenic world. And then there's, obviously an important part of Western. Yes. And that is like what he's talking about is pre-Christ, and then the Roman Empire, the both Jews and Christians used as a way, they used the Roman Empire as a highway to spread their ideas. The Roman Empire fell and they literally became the vacuum. They literally became the leading power structure in the power vacuum, which, for better or worse, I'm not a huge fan of institutional church to begin with, though I am a very spiritual person. But there's no doubt. Look, and then that led to, Martin Luther and Protestantism in general. So I don't know how you could say it doesn't have not only a key, it's a dominant, in the three worldviews that drove the founding fathers. Judeo-Christian was one of them. Their Protestant zeal was one of them. So I don't understand I do understand. I hear that a lot from certain groups of people. And those groups of people are Jew haters. I'm sorry. I mean, it's true.
This kid has said, it's true. He has suggested that.
And I didn't know any of that. I just heard it. And I was like,
he spread conspiracy theories that Jews spread the Black Death, that Jews do rituals where they drink the blood of Christian kids. He does it by indirect ways. He'll just start saying, I wonder if COVID is spreading by these dinners they're doing. But anybody who knows what the background is knows what he's talking about, knows what he's trying to spread, how vicious that is. I mean, this is a guy who took shots at Lauren Southern for not having a white husband. That's who this guy is. This guy is someone we should have nothing to do with. He needs to be purged from polite society. I'll debate him and debate people like him. I'll debate any racist or bigot any day because they'll expose themselves. He couldn't hold it back. He said America would be better off if Israel didn't even exist.
Yeah,
said that Israel has been faking it for 75 years just so they can get the Christians in the end. I mean, this is insane.
And that the Israeli lobby is more of a, because what he was basically saying, and not basically, he was saying the Israeli lobby is more of a threat to America than Islamofascism. And I was
pretending
like,
Islamofascism didn't exist. Now, I do want to thank all of the Groyper kids who raided all the chat rooms and all the rest, because the other tactic of fascist is that in the old days, 20s and 30s, they would use street theater and street violence as their method of control. And they would also convince themselves that meant they were popular by winning these street fights and street theater. Both the communists needed the fascists and the fascists needed the communists. They used the threat of the other as a part of their success. But they loved to fight in the public streets. That's why Antifa loved the alt-right. They thought the alt-right was a godsend. Charlottesville was the ultimate thing for them, the ultimate form of street theater. And the alt-right played right into it. By the way, that was Nick Fuentes' coming out party. He was one of the people marching in Charlottesville and bragging about it. So, I mean, that gives you a sense of where this kid comes from. These were people with the tiki torches saying, you know, you will not replace us and all that garbage. And talking about blood and soil and just old anti-Jewish hateful conspiracy theories. That's their backstory. But his followers do the same thing. They stalk and harass people on the internet. And I did the debate in part because I wanted people to witness this in live time without me previewing it to anybody. Say, here, you're going to get to watch who these people are. They're going to behave in ways that you realize, I don't want anything to do with that. And people got to see it and were shocked and stunned by it. And so people that were dancing around with some of his ideas started realizing where those ideas come from. The second part was they did take the bait. I wanted them to use my terms over and over again, and they gladly did because they're all such kids. They think Islamofascism is something I made up before the debate. You know, they don't realize it's a term that's been around since 1933. It's an idea that dates to the late 19th century. I mean, you could say it dates to the 7th century and the original Islamic caliphates, but it just if we do it in the modern age, the term was being described by some of the best political analysts around. And in the 90s, it became repopularized as Islamofascism became a greater and greater threat. But for the populist movement, shouldn't have anything to do with those people. Shouldn't associate with them, should not dance around with their ideas. You know, you can have an independent view on whether to support Israel or not without being near those people. You can be a pure isolationist if you want, without being near those people. But be supporting those people, praising those people, adapting their views, repeating their views, that is a massive mistake of the populist movement. It needs to keep the fascist out. They're one of the greatest threats to any populist movement, left or right. I mean, communism has done extreme damage to the populist left all around the world for the last century. I mean, Russia had a moment of populist left that was crushed by the communists because, they're our allies and we can work with them. No, that's not how that works. Your head ends up on the stake first if they ever end up winning.
That's always.
Let's show the poll. So for people to understand, where do Trump voters stand? There is no close controversy on this issue with them. So they asked, who do you side with more? This is a YouGov poll. The Israelis, the Palestinians, about equal or not sure. And, to be honest, a quarter of the country has no clue because they pay no attention to it.
We found very similar results, which shocked me, Robert, because I was stunned because I've seen Gallup has been doing this for years, and I don't know where Gallup gets such a small, not sure number. We have a huge one. It's about that size, and about, we're about 38% Israel, about 13% Palestine, equals probably about, I'll look right now. But I couldn't believe when you sent this to me because I was stunned by how many not sures there was, man. But go ahead, finish explaining what it says.
I think, and now that represents a lot of your marginal voters that have no idea what's going on over there and don't really care, understandably so. But for Trump voters, this is not close. For Trump voters, 72% side with Israelis, 4% side with the Palestinians. This is not a close issue, folks. If you pay too much attention to the comment sections and the chats and the online polls by these groups and their Twitter trolling, they just like the alt-right, they think they're much more popular than they are. With Trump voters, this siding with Islamofascism or the Palestinian cause is utterly unpopular. Indeed, one of the great mistakes Rand Paul made was siding with the Palestinians in this issue in 2008, 2012. It's what killed his campaign. As soon as I saw him do it, I was like, he's done.
It's over.
He can build his libertarian constituency, but he just told all evangelicals that he can't even figure this issue out.
It's
so
in
if
the
he can't
80s.
figure this issue out, they're not going to trust him on anything else. This is a no-brainer, folks. If you're for Trump, if you're for populism, this is the only choice. And anybody that's telling you that's politically savvy to go another direction is not paying attention to public opinion.
We'll see. I mean, we'll put this up. People will be able to see this. But with us, we're about the same, a little bit more for Israel. Palestine, we're a little bit less. Unsure is almost dead. I'm insane. We're a little bit less, though. This is unweighted, so give it a chance. But instead of saying about equal, we said neither. We said neither. I don't side with, neither side. Not because if you sided, you can't be about equal. You can't, right?
That's
because
true.
If you were, that's ridiculous.
It's either these people kill everybody or these people get to stay alive. That's the choice.
Right. And I'm stunned by how close. Do you support or oppose the establishment of an independent Palestinian state on the West Bank and the Gaza Strip? I thought support was going to be winning going away, and that is not true. They're about even. I couldn't believe that. And if you look at who supports Trump voters are about 80% of Israeli support, and which is very close to what YouGov has, and evangelicals they're about 92. So that's, whoa. You folks, it's hard to get 90 on anything these days. Yeah. So you are not going to win a Republican nomination by giving sympathy to the Palestinians or by saying, oh, well, we don't have to really be for either, because what I think this says is most, Americans do recognize, no matter which way they go on it, they still recognize it's a binary choice. Only about 30% to a quarter think that we could just do nothing about it. And that's what I take out of our findings. They wrote about equal. You can't do that. You have to say neither. I want to be, I don't care about either one. And I thought that was a better way to ask that question, so we did it that way. And Gallup may even say neither, too. I don't know what this about equal is, Robert. How could you be about equal? Yeah, it's like, are you a Republican or are you a Democrat? No, I'm about equal. No, it's not the way it goes, man. It doesn't work that way.
Exactly. And the other aspect of this, there's been this liberal myth put out that evangelical Christians support Israel because of, prophetic religious beliefs about end times. That is not the case. They've done detailed polling. A bunch of liberal posters set out to prove this, and it got disproven. What they found was that the number one reason evangelicals or any group backs Israel is knowledge of the issue and experience with a favorable experience with Jewish people. And that's the evangelical Christian story. They've got to watch Israel for 75 years now. And many of them have, when they can, have tried to take visits. Their friends or their family have taken visits. And they found that Israel protects the Holy Land more than any civilization in history. And they've also had extremely positive interactions with Orthodox Jews in the political, cultural arena. And the effect of it is they have very favorable views of people of Jewish background. And that's what influences why they're way above average well-informed. There's a lot of foreign policy issues that even Americans concerned with foreign policy don't know very well. This is not one of them. This is one of them where you can talk to a random person in a church and they can tell you about what the Palestinians were doing in 1929 in killing 65 Jews at Hebron, including murdering babies. They can tell you about what happened in the 19-teens, 1930s, 1940s, about the long, long history of Palestinian Arabs siding with the Nazis, being pro-Nazi, supporting Nazi ideology to this very day. They understand things that both the anti-war left, which lives in denial land about this issue and repeats propaganda like they're Soviet agents of the 1970s, just reading off the USSR's latest sheet, or the
because they They did, Robert. Oslo was on over the weekend. After I got done working, I sat down and popped it on. And, I'm looking at it. I'm like, wow, you know what? For a flick, it's actually pretty accurate. And it was, they were fighting, and you have the two Jewish delegates and the two Palestinian delegates. And he's like, would you just read that right off of Stalin's sheet? He's like, did they give that to you? Was that, I mean, that was true, though, because he was using words, comrade. And you can go back and watch all of these public speeches from people who were appointed to at least spearhead negotiations. Listen to the terms they use. Look at how Arafat dressed. Look at who does he remind? He's like a Muslim Mussolini. I mean, right? He's like a Muslim Mussolini. He took persona.
I think it was his uncle. I know it was a relative. Was the Grand Mufti, who spent his 4 years during World War II working with the Nazis in Berlin. This is a long history. To his credit, Good Logic did a movie review with his dad, who's old school professor. And his dad is like, if you had a stereotype of an old rabbi, he looks and talks like his dad. His dad's even got the voice. I want to find a way to imitate that voice. Because there was a popular meme going around that properly had Fuentes as a little Arab terrorist and me as a Jewish rabbi, which I thought was fantastic. Alex Jones is the imam in between trying to mediate, which is funny.
He did a great job. He did.
Oh, yeah, it was a fantastic
good job.
Great. But Good Logic did a great job, and all they did is break down. His dad used to teach some documentary films about the history of Islamofascism as part of his history lessons so that people could understand both the past, the present, and predict the future. And he did a good job on his Good Logic show, which is Good Logic spelled Lawgic. It's amazing how many some parts of the right don't still understand what Trump was trying to do in the Middle East. But those are the only policies to be on. This idea that we should start listening to the mini David Dukes of the world is insane. And so hopefully that needs to be a constant effort because I use the debate also as an opportunity to find out who is still wanting to dance around with the alt-right, this new version of the alt-right. And whoever it is, I'm disassociating from, because I don't want that. If you're not smart enough to figure out that you shouldn't have another little David Duke mini Hitler type as your spokesperson, then you're not smart enough to really listen to as an influencer in the populist debate.
And they'll elevate him after a while, Robert. They will, because Richard
the media
Spencer
loves
was a
him.
nobody.
I mean, he's a caricature
David Duke
of populist
was a nobody.
views.
Yeah, they grab people, and put them at the. I remember going and covering. I remember this is going and covering the one of the. Hold on, that's just tough. But anyway, I remember going and covering one of the UF events Richard Spencer did, and media was the majority of his crowd. People did come to listen, no doubt, and sadly, what I feared would happen did happen, which is Antifa and some of the other left-wing groups came with the media's blessing. Of course, they portrayed them as the freedom fighters and all of this, and they acted like animals. That's just the truth. Screaming and shouting, it's like, and some people that may have been on the fence, I believe, were pushed to Richard Spencer because what he was saying, they fell into his trap, but meanwhile, he was falling into the media's trap. It was like the worst of us, Robert. It was the worst of us. The old fascist
people who should go back and study 1920s, 1930s. Antifa originated as a communist front group in Germany. Because why? Being anti-fascist sounded a lot more popular than just being commie. So it's the same. They need each other. The Antifa wants the alt-right and the alt-right to thrive because that elevates and legitimates who they are. And the fascists want Antifa to rise because that legitimates and authorizes who they are. So that's why populists on both sides should stay away from any fascistic element that wants to co-opt their language and co-opt their rhetoric. People like Nick Fuentes are not America first. They're just Jews last. That's all they are. They're race haters and race baiters, and we should have nothing to do with them, and we should condemn them every opportunity we get to clarify and properly delineate what populism is and what it isn't, because otherwise these fascistic elements are very dangerous and very threatening to the populist cause. I mean, just look at how much, if Trump had disassociated more clearly from the alt-right, had done what Bill Clinton did with Sister Souljah in the 1990s, if he'd done the same with Richard Spencer early in 2017, and when Mike Cernovich was taking the lead on that, excluding Spencer from the deplorable, excluding other people from the deplorable, and he took a lot of heat and a lot of crap for it. If Trump would have followed that lead, then Charlottesville would have been a non-story for Trump, because it would have been that no one could have associated him with that part of what was happening at Charlottesville. But because he didn't, because he made the mistake of dancing around with them and letting them dance near him, it hurt him. So that's where he's got two groups. He's got to keep the crazy outsiders out. He's got to keep the corrupt insiders out. He's got to start being smarter and more strategic at how he moves forward politically. There are some signs of that happening, but we'll see. Though that might be a good transition into Trump 2024.
Yeah, speaking of upcoming opportunities for populism, I grabbed some of these charts because what I'm seeing, not just with this poll we did with the Public Polling Project, but district polling, state level polling, even in very blue areas in California, in Wisconsin, in Ohio. I mean, Ohio was pretty pro-Trump, but, of course, Democrats would love to swing it back if they could, or at least peel off some of it. The bottom line is there's a lot of opportunity for populism if they don't shoot themselves in the foot. There's a lot of opportunity for Republicans if they don't shoot themselves in the foot. And that's not just true of the United States. So here's France. Let me put up Macron's approval rating now. And, I mean, it hasn't been good for a while. But here's Mr. Lockdown.
Almost nobody's talked about this approval rating.
Yeah,
they love talking about where Trump was.
Yeah,
Macron has been below Trump for ever since the lockdown started.
Where it could get him, Le Pen, and here's a great example.
And that's the big
that
news
ties
right
into
there.
what you were saying. Yeah, here's the big news, and this is the example of what you were saying. So last time they were able to turn her into an unacceptable.
Oh,
exactly.
What did they do? They associated her with her father and her father's history of dancing around with fascistic elements and anti-Jewish elements on the right. Yeah. And so what did she do? She decided, I'm going to start a new party and I'm going to attack my father. And what was the effect of that? All of a sudden people realize, oh, she's not her father. She wants nothing to do with those fascistic elements, which again, fascism in Europe is really in the front of the mind because it's only, there's people alive today who lived through it and who've told their kids and grandkids stories about it. So the key for Le Pen was disassociating herself from that far right groups, that fascistic right, and she was able to do so, and it was genius by her, by the way. She kept provoking her father into attacking her. So that just enhanced her credibility, as she's not part of that. She's a populist movement, not anything to do with a fascistic cause that her dad frequently played footsie with. And there's an ugly history of anti-Jewish particular behavior in France, of course. I mean, this is where, the J'accuse comes from. I mean,
Robert, they threw their hands up and they said, what do you need? That's it. A lot of the country did.
Well,
anyway.
that was the joke going around when there was talk of a French Civil War because of those French generals talking about they don't like where things are going culturally in France. Somebody said, well, which side of since it's a French Civil War, which side do you think forfeits first? Which is sad French history. But
and this is my point with why we need to with Trump in 4 years, another 4 years, he probably would have done it because he did understand that really our entire foreign policy is a post-World War II dinosaur. These are not people you can rely on, Robert, to stop the rise of China. And who won, by the way, in our poll. Congratulations to Beijing. You are seen as the number one threat to the United States. If you look at about a quarter picked Russia. If you look at the party, you'll see. Very interesting who does and who does not find China to be a threat, who does and who does not find Russia to be a threat. There are still, clearly, a lot of liberals who flatly, they're in the Russia syndrome still, man. They are. I don't know how anybody could objectively look at both of those countries and think that Russia is a bigger threat to the United States than China. And it's just nuts. It's just nuts. But, you said before, nowhere has it been more. It's still in the subconscious of these people. Look at Italy. And before I show this one, it is a big history of right-wing parties being underestimated in these polls, man.
And this, by the way, this is where Salvini. Goes back. This is the flip side.
Here,
so Le Pen is surging because she disassociated from the fascistic cause, redefined populism to be anti-fascist. In Italy, the populist movement decided to go along with the Salvini, and this is also thanks to the Duran. They're the ones who tipped me off to this story that you can find at they're on Locals and on YouTube. But in Italy, what happened is Salvini, the populist, decided to go along with the corrupt insiders, and he put a Euro leader type, World Bank, EU, globalist, integrationist, Europeanist type, went in a coalition with him. And what happened? It led to a rise of a more quasi-fascistic far right because people are unhappy with his decision to go into bed with corrupt insiders. So this is the other side of stay away from the fascistic side, stay away from the corrupt insiders. Pure populism is intensely popular, but it's also a reminder the EU types thought that a coalition that put them into a higher position of power and their policies being implemented would lead to more popularity for their positions. And now, of course, they're shocked that the far right is surging in Italy. Far right is surging in Italy because the populist movement will find a voice if somebody doesn't give it to them. And so and that's where the key is. Salvini made a big mistake going in with the corrupt insiders. It has badly damaged him. He's now almost below where this new far right party is moving into.
It's almost.
Yep.
I mean, look at it. This is honestly, this is an incredible result. But also, it's a bit of a warning for us here, especially the Republican Party. You go back to the Romneys and the Ryans and the Jonah Goldbergs and the David Frenches and all the other losers who couldn't win, anything, then what you're going to find is probably worse. No, not probably. It will be worse than what they claim the Trump movement is now.
Father Coughlin started to surge in the United States in 1936 and 1940. People forget. There were huge Nazi celebrations in the United States.
Yeah, there were.
There was a massive one at Madison Square Garden. They were marching through streets. And in the 1920s, the Ku Klux Klan was an indigenous American fascistic movement. People didn't realize how they were more popular in the 1920s than any time in their history. And they were popular in Indiana. They were, a certain man, we won't go into it, but a certain man's father was at such an event in New York City. That was why there were some doubts about him coming in. He has no instincts like this, but his father, he was just a few generations removed from Germany. So there's a history of this, and what happens is fascistic movements or communistic movements on the left will co-opt populist movements if the populist leaders fail to advance populist causes. If they either dance around with the corrupt insiders or dance around with the fascistic element, populism loses. But the insiders should recognize that their strategies are being rejected, that the response to going along with their policies is the rise of a far right or far left, not the rise of anything else. And so this is a populist era where either the populist wins or the fascistic elements of the left or the right wins. That's where it's going to go. The corrupt insiders' days are numbered. Just like we have a dementia candidate with days left effectively on his efficacy in Biden, that Biden sort of personifies where the neoliberal, neoconservative, centrist, elitist agenda is. It's on its deathbed. It's towards its end. And the only choice is populism or fascism of the left or right. And that's where populists need to be smart, reject the corrupt insiders, reject the fascistic element, and you can have a future just like Le Pen is showing in France.
And they push this decency argument here in the United States. We got to get back to normal. What's decent? And it really does. I mean, it's incredible. This result I'm going to read. Basically Americans. It took maybe 4 months for Americans to remember. Oh, right. That's what normal looked like. I mean, it really did. So. And by the way, the idea Joe Biden was ever a decent human being is ridiculous. He's always been a 4-letter word, a 3-letter and 4-letter word combined. He's an a-hole. He has. Yeah, I know you don't want to yell at me. He has never been a nice guy. He's always been a crabby old man, a rotten, snappy old man. Even when he was younger, he was a snappy guy. But this goes to what we're saying right now. Regarding political figures and elected leaders, which would you prefer? And then we ask people basically the difference between a moral person and policy. And moral was morality. I prefer a leader with perceived moral character who shares my views, even if they rarely keep their promises, right? So, in other words, somebody, very textbook politician, right? So I am, the modern creation of a presidential candidate. I appear to be moral. Of course I share your views, and I'll do my best to get it done, right? Or policy. I prefer a leader who always keeps their promises and shares my views, even if they have moral flaws. All right, 57.5% chose people who are flawed morally, but it doesn't matter to them if they are morally flawed if they get it done. Do you know how many people picked Joe Biden's argument? About a quarter. That's it. And the rest said they were unsure, had no opinion. So, that's another failure. Honestly, of the Trump, that was another place Trump could have hammered a little harder. Promises made, promises kept was an attempt to do that, but it wasn't. He didn't do a good enough job showing people. Remember his convention speech, and it was right after he said it. Like you and I texted and we're like, that's it. That's his campaign. Joe Biden sent your sons over to Iraq and your jobs to China. And that's it, because that's all you needed to tell people. Yes, it was always going to be hard once the pandemic came, but that's what you had to tell people. But don't you remember what normal was like? And now they do know what normal is like. Hasn't helped at all. On the vaccination, by the way, there's still a quarter who are a hard no. And they're not getting it. It doesn't matter. Now, it seems that I got to go back and check, but it does seem that some who told us they intended to get vaccinated did end up in, I have been vaccinated now. All right, I have to go back and just double check and make sure, but it looks like that way to me. However, you want to get scared? There are people who don't believe this vaccine is safe, yet who got vaccinated. I kid you not.
Well, people were saying this across the board. I think Allison, either Allison Morrow or someone else was interviewing. She's also on Locals and has a YouTube channel. A former longtime reporter who went out independent on her own.
Yep.
That what people were saying, it was either her or someone else. I forget which one. Somebody was saying that what they were being told was that the number one, the doctors were coming back. They'd even ask somebody, hey, do you want to go through the risk? And almost universally, the answer was, I'm not getting this for my health. I'm getting this because I want to live normally.
Yep.
So that's the reason why a lot of people are getting. So that part of this experiment worked. They made life so miserable that people would beg for an experimental drug. And that's a little shocking. And I think that's why exposing Fauci for who he is and how this pandemic really originated and arose, why was your life miserable the last year? It was economically
inconvenient. Remember that? It's just economically inconvenient. Yeah, well, and that's another thing. It's going to be interesting to see these the economic confidence index.
Now, my understanding is that's going down.
Everybody said that people had to get the vaccine to get surgery, and that happened to my
dad. Oh, that's right. That happened to your old man. Mm-hmm. You had to get the vaccine to get surgery, right?
Yes. Oh, yeah.
So, it's there, too. And I'm telling you, it's 11% who had no confidence at all yet got vaccinated. Because we said, this is how it was worded. Please tell us how much trust you have in the safety of the coronavirus COVID-19 mRNA vaccines. A great deal, a fair amount, not very much, or none at all. And overlap is incredible. I can't wait for people to see this in nested detail. It's just incredible. And by the way, this is like D+8 now. So I gave people, I probably would have crunched this and, put it on today because we had enough. But I was giving some people who started time to finish and submit, because you can save and continue later on some of them. And there's always some schmuck who sees what are the odds on Monday, and then says, wait a minute, on Monday on What Are the Odds, it was 24.2. Now today it's 26.1. I got you. You know, there's always somebody who does that. They have nothing better to do with their life than to right? So that happens. So I was gonna do it, but I figured, you know what, just give it some. I don't expect them to change all that much. A lot of it's unweighted, but when you have numbers on some of this stuff this big, it tells you it's across the board. And regional numbers, you look at them, may not even impact it all that much. Geography may not even impact it all that much, but it could still slightly. Now with Biden, the importance of coronavirus as a voting issue is collapsing. It's completely collapsing. Even in a very red, very blue district, I just looked at for a client before I came on. Coronavirus is in third place with it's third place 7%. That's it. Jobs is by far, the economy and jobs by far. And I can see this in some of Joe Biden's approval ratings because all he ever had was coronavirus. And he's at least down 2 to 4 points from our last poll. I don't want anybody to like hold me to it, you know, but at a glance, it doesn't look good, man, because this is really.
I think he's going to end up with as at least in ratio, a Obama-like ratio in news coverage. Because I track the headlines from all the big news media.
At least, maybe better, Robert.
And I don't think there's been. I mean, the only tiny, slightly negative stories about Biden related to immigration about a month ago. Other than that, there's been no negative coverage. I think Obama's coverage ended up being, according to Harvard, a 93. I think it was 93-7 positive coverage by mainstream press. Even Fox was split 50-50 with Obama. And I think it's going to be like 96-4, 97-3 favorable coverage. So I mean, he's got so much incredibly favorable coverage, and anybody who raises any doubts gets ripped. Look at what happened to Manchin over the weekend on the Sunday show. Yeah, I mean, that CBS guy was reading like he was Pelosi gave him his questions. I mean, it's such a crock that these people pretend to be independent. I mean, I saw today, it was maybe an AP headline that said, you know, Manchin opposes these election reforms that are so popular around the whole country. No, and mislabeling it voting rights. That. Because there's one set of laws that's meant to expand Voting Rights Act. Some I have questions about, but it's not nearly the big controversial law. That's H.R. 1 and Senate 1. That's what that is. That has nothing to do with voting rights. And let's show people the election reforms that are popular versus these are the ones that the media is saying are all unpopular that Republican legislators are passing. Those are the ones that are overwhelmingly popular.
Jim Crow 2.0.
Yeah, exactly. When almost everybody agrees with these election reforms, whereas the reforms that they are pushing, that the H.R. 1 and Senate 1, are the ones that are intensely unpopular in the country.
Yeah, even when this is what we did, which was, I mean, not to be, toot our own horns, but it's good to give people the proposals that are in the bill line item, right? The major proposals that are in there. Because, there sadly are some Democrats who will tell you the truth when you give them the actual proposal. But then when you tell them it's H.R. 1, they know that's a Democratic bill. Mm-hmm. So then they'll tell you that they support it. It still couldn't get majority support, though, barely, among even Democrats, because by that time, I think a lot of this was discussed, and I think a lot of them, really kind of got it. But I mean, it couldn't get majority support. Yeah, I was right. I'm questioning myself here, but basically, they gave the voter veto to all the 16-year-old voting, 17-year-old voting, non-citizens voting, non-citizens.
For those that don't know, H.R. 1 and Senate 1 is intended to make it illegal to require photo identification.
That's right.
They want to make it illegal to require signature verification. They want to make it illegal to ban ballot harvesting. They want to make it illegal to have some of these election day deadlines in place. They want to require early voting to occur and not be a state rule.
Extra time.
They want to limit party watchers and party observers. They want to expand the ability of non-citizens and felons to vote and people under 18 to vote in different respects. And as you see, almost every position of H.R. 1 is unpopular across the board. I mean, the media's out there lying about how popular. Yeah, if you ask people in general, Are you for voting rights? Yes,
I know,
I'm for
right?
voting rights. See, everybody's for HR 1. I mean,
That's
just
what they
the media
do.
lying. And you would think after getting caught with the big COVID lie, that's the big lie, the big COVID lie about it not being a lab leak or not being man-made, you would think they'd learn. But they're out there lying again today, trying to claim that these things are popular when they're totally unpopular.
And Manchin, what's sad about his op-ed. Now, I tweeted this earlier today. I read it. Yeah, I read his op-ed yesterday. But what's sad about it, or in his press release, really. But what was sad is that none of the considerations that Joe Manchin, said this is what I took into consideration. This is why I'm voting no. They were very typical senatorial supremacy. So this isn't good for the institution. This isn't good for the country. This isn't good for procedure. Nowhere was it. What do the voters want? And what is the truth of the matter? All right. So would it expand fraud? Would it make fraud easier? And then do Americans support it? We flatly ask. Just forget about, like you said, that what they say is questions like, do you support or oppose expanding access to voting? Do you support or oppose expanding access to early voting? Do you support or, crap like that? Do you support or oppose Republicans attempting to block blacks from voting by providing IDs they don't have? The questions can be so crazy when you just lay out what they are. And by the way, we pulled from HR 1, we pulled the text summary from govtrack.us. And that is what we showed people. So that is or roll call. So that's where we usually, when we're polling bills, that's where we get it from. This is what the legislators themselves wrote. We didn't add any spin on it. This is what they wrote. And the bottom line is, this is so bipartisan, even when you throw the term House Resolution 1, otherwise, dubbed HR 1, it still is 2-1 unfavorable almost. So, look, that is with Democrats buckling at the end like partisans, and a bunch of them saying, well, I may oppose doing this, but I still support H.R. 1. It's a Democrat bill. So there was sadly a significant number of them who did that. But independents and Republicans didn't budge. And they're like, no. I mean, it's overwhelmingly unpopular. And Manchin, he's trying to be two things. He's trying to be this, statesman and this great deliberator, but he didn't deliberate on anything that was important at all. And how could it be that these senators, these Republicans who voted to impeach Trump, are now, so partisan? Come on. Look, Joe, the bottom line is, will it increase fraud, and do Americans want it? And the filibuster, I didn't put that up here. Damn, I meant to. But again, same thing on the filibuster, Robert. Yeah, Donald Trump was calling for it because he knew if there was one less blue dog in the Senate, it would be dead right now. They would do it with Kamala. You think they wouldn't? Of course they would. Of course they would.
And I think basically Joe Manchin thinks he's Cicero, but he's actually closer to Brutus. I mean, that's basically who Joe Manchin is.
That's a good way to put it, man. That's a good way to put it. And these people can always go check the crosstabs. They can go to bigdatapoll.com right now. It's still in a press release blog section. If scroll down the website a little bit, and you will see voters overwhelmingly reject HR 1. You can go through the crosstabs. It is every race, every region. It's just almost everything across. It's almost everything across the board is either a majority or a large plurality. It is not anywhere where you can find a group of people that's that's for it. Look, they don't care about that stuff though, Robert. It's never a question of what do people want. And Joe Manchin's supposed to be from West Virginia, for crying out loud. If he can't articulate whether or at least make the case about either of those 2 points, then nobody will. Is my point. Nobody will. And it may be dead now, but this is how tenuous of a situation it is for us. We're one Joe Manchin away from annihilating any hope at voter integrity. Unless, of course, Republicans were to sue and they'd win. I don't know. I mean, that's your ballpark, but Democrats.
I think right now there's high confidence that HR 1 is dead. that they're going to try to resurrect it, but it's just dead. I mean, he's struggling to get a basic infrastructure bill through. So I mean that's Biden is in huge trouble politically. He's not. I mean, on the national stage, I think they're trying to elevate him as now an international hero. They're gonna
They got nowhere else to do.
I think that's why they're doing the whole summit with Russia. They think somehow, I don't know what narrative they think they can script out of that makes him look like an icon. They can't put him up with Putin for longer than 10 minutes because that, you talk about a mismatch. That's not favorable for Joe, for stumbling Joe.
Embarrassing.
So I think the politically, Biden is in serious harm's way at this juncture. Doesn't have the political will or political support in the Senate for his budget, for his infrastructure plan, or for their election law reforms, or for the adding states, or for Supreme Court stacking the Supreme Court. So the institutional changes that they wanted, they're not going to get. And so far politically, other than New Mexico, in every other race, we're seeing that the realignment of working class Latinos continues to trend in a Republican or at least anti-democratic direction.
Go ahead.
I'll say the only canary in the coal mine is in New Mexico. Working class white Trump voters did not turn out in that special election disproportionately. And so the big concern for 2022 is, do those low propensity Trump voters turn out and vote or not? And by the way, that's where some of these, even the Democratic states like Nevada passing these election law reforms, it's not clear it will easily help Democrats in 2022. Because what these election law reforms mostly do is they reduce the effective intensity and equalize the effective turnout. Now, they also expand voter fraud risk. So that gives Democrats an edge because they do that better than Republicans do. But in terms of the turnout component, take a state like Nevada. There's a lot of working class rural voters who are low propensity voters, but the state's going to make it so easy for them to vote that might counterbalance what they're trying to do. Remember, there's a history on both sides of passing election law reforms that backfire on them. So it's not like they can guarantee it's going to go a certain direction when the election context changes. But I think that mostly we're seeing suburban rejection. What you're showing in these polls is suburbia has no interest in all of this woke politics, critical race theory, men participating in women's sports, continuing to mask their 6-year-old elections. Saw that again last week, and they're not, and Democrats are not expanding their base there. Where the only place where there's a little bit of worry is the rural working class whites being motivated to vote. When the Republican candidate was uniquely weak for New Mexico won, plus everybody knew there was no chance. I mean, the overwhelmingly Democratic district, but it was a sign that if you don't have a smart populist on the ballot, you can't guarantee turnout.
Even Target Smart,
class whites.
Even Target Smart released new data mirroring ours completely, which is another statistical anomaly here, flatly. And the bottom line is, what it shows is that with Donald Trump, and this is this is Trump, and this is populism, and this goes to what you're saying, Robert, because I'm going to read this, and then I'm going to give you the danger, what we found in our polling. But Target Smart found what we have been releasing on peoplespundit.locals.com, peoplespundit.locals.com. You get the voter analysis like Target Smart is doing with us. And even in Arizona, where Democrats made voter registration progress before the 2020 election, it was one of the states where both of us had told you that Democrats were doing a good job of getting new voters registered. And everywhere else, they were getting their butts kicked. In the new voter category, the low propensity voters, there are two different categories. When you combine them, Republicans spanked Democrats across the country. So it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to look at a result that we're looking at here, folks. Even in Arizona, Republicans still turned out about 10,000 low propensity voters, first time voters. It's because when you hear first time, people think of age, right? And that's not really true. So that we're talking about a 40-year-old working class man or woman who got off their butts to vote when they haven't voted before for anybody. They even beat Democrats in Arizona by about 10,000. In North Carolina, it was about 200,000 first-time voters when there was only about 170 for Democrats in North Carolina. In Pennsylvania, Donald Trump got almost 320,000 new voters to the polls. Stunning, all right? And Democrats, they got about 285, all right? So in Florida, it was this is why Nate Silver, the fool that he is, was saying, I'm going to walk my little French poodle and not entertain this, all right? We were telling you, Laura's laughing hysterical, but it's true. I'm going to walk my little dog. I don't want to hear about voter turnout. Okay, well, you got killed and you look like an idiot again because you're a loser dork who came over from sports where you weren't good there either. And now you're pretending to be good because there's a bunch of rich people who want to support your failing project and enterprise that supports a narrative. That's all you are for them. In Florida, 400,000 first-time voters. Bam! All right, and in the Democrats, they got about 300 and looks like 380. It's like a little line. I'm trying to estimate. Roughly 380. That's stunning. But Donald Trump is gone. So the danger here, going back to my little sheet, let's look at our favorability ratings. Once again, Mitch McConnell is the most hated person in the country. Okay, when it comes to very unfavorable, we have him about 4 in 10 again. This is unweighted, so I'm giving him leeway because he's actually over 4 in 10. That may come down a little bit. The problem is the difference between when weights have an impact is because Republicans hate their own leaders. Republican and Republican-leaning voters hate their own leaders. That's not true of Democrats. Independents and Republicans hate them, whereas everybody hates Republican leaders. It doesn't matter what you are, right? Mitch McConnell's very favorable rating is 6%. Even Nancy Pelosi is 19, right? Kevin McCarthy... by the way, Mitch McConnell's unfavorable, 40. Another very, somewhat, is over 20. So he may very well even be worse this time, but he's generally going to be where we found him last time. 60% unfavorable rating. All right, 24, 25, maybe if he's lucky, favorable combined. That's abysmal. Even Nancy Pelosi is about 40 with favorable. It's just that she has a lot of people, about the same number as Mitch McConnell, a little bit, just a hair less, who view her unfavorably, very unfavorably, I mean. Her somewhat isn't as bad as Mitch McConnell's, though it's about 8 points better. The difference is her party doesn't totally hate her, so she still has support. 20% almost, very favorable, and another 22.2 unweighted again. Remember, somewhat favorable, so it'll be like a negative, Robert, like a negative, negative 10, maybe, something like that. Whereas Mitch McConnell will be negative 30. So, that you can't win with people like this leading your party. Now Kevin McCarthy, he doesn't have a 35% unknown this time. Oh no. No, he does not. Where'd it go? Somewhat unfavorable and very unfavorable. That's where it went. So now Kevin McCarthy, congratulations, 3 in 10 can't stand your guts, and another 2 in 10 don't like you, and less than about a quarter have a somewhat or very unfavorable, very favorable, sorry. Very favorable is not much better than Mitch McConnell's for Kevin McCarthy. It's 8%. So they're separated by 2 percentage points. Not to throw the results or anything, but you gotta go, man. All right? You and Frank, you gotta go. If you really care about your party, which means you care about your country, right? Logically here. Because if you believe your party has the best vision for the country, then hurting your party is hurting your country. Right? It's only logical. It follows. You have to go. You're not going to turn this around. Every time we do a poll, a few points, comes off the, Kevin McCarthy. Those few points hurt about Frank Luntz, I guess, in the last couple of weeks. And they're done with him. You're not going to win them back, Robert. You're not going to turn your image around. So your best friend told the Midwest that OxyContin was safe to take and turn half the country into a junkie? That's your buddy? You rented a room to the Oxy pusher? Man, now how much you think? How much positive impact you think it'll have on him that his roomie, his buddy, also pushes a vaccine that 30% of the country doesn't think is safe. At least, by the way, at least 30%, probably more. I mean, you can't do this act they're doing, this like attempt to juggle, like Democrats are just so bad. You have to vote. Maybe you hate me personally. This is their argument. Maybe you hate me personally and you hate my friend in the Senate personally, but we're still not them, and they're socialists and they're dangerous. That's not going to work, guys. It's not going to work. They have to go. They have to go. And what I'm saying is, this is that you were talking about this in the whole first half. Look at what happened in France. Look at what could happen. Look at what happened in Italy. If this becomes a fracture like this, then it's not going to help the populist wing that did so much to turn out 400,000 new voters in Florida. 400,000. Again, Mitt Romney, he couldn't stay on his knees long enough to get those people out to the polls. It's not going to happen. So the only choice here is to move forward with hopefully people you think you like a little bit better personally than Donald Trump, or destroy it all, or wreck it all. I mean, that's the choice Kevin McCarthy has to make. That's the choice Mitch McConnell, you just won re-election, good for you. But that's the choice. So what? Be a senior senator from Kentucky and give the reins to somebody else if you really owe that much to K Street. You could leave. Your wife's making enough from both of you. She's pulling enough in from Beijing from both of you. You don't need to stay there. I mean, the question really is now, do these people care about their country? Or do they care more about their country than they do their game, their pockets, their, whatever it may be? What do you think is in their minds, Robert? They know they're not liked. Their own polling can't be any better for them. They know they're not liked. Is it just all about money for they're fat cats, man. Let's just call them what they are. They're the only fat cats remaining in the Republican Party. And they're definitely the only ones holding the umbrella for the other ones that still remain. What do you think goes through their minds?
It's a legacy power structure, and they haven't adjusted. So, I mean, it's been fascinating to watch the degree to which the institutional powers that be still don't recognize that in their era, it was about inside power, knowledge of the institutions, relationships to the people that have power within those institutions, being at the cocktail party crowd, placating the think tanks, pleasing the K Street lobbyist crowd. And your leverage came from your knowledge of the institutions and those individuals with power and your ability to raise money. And the problem is that model start being effective almost a decade ago. And it's just accelerated. We live in you look at Marjorie Taylor Greene, she doesn't care about it at all. Why? Because she knows she can be more successful using social media and crowdfunding and independent media to actually build a real base of support in the nation beyond her congressional district, making her functionally immune from the party. AOC on the left pretty much did the same thing. And so, the Democratic Party of New York planned on taking her out, but they had to back off, and all efforts failed because she recognized the same thing on the left, but tactically the same goals: use social media, use independent media, use crowdsource funding, and you don't need to be part of the Washington establishment anymore. And the Washington establishment still doesn't realize this. The number one utility of a Speaker of the House or leader of the Senate, majority or minority leader, is to be able to be on independent media, have a strong social media presence, and be able to crowdfund. You can see this in that most of the Republican money is shifted to crowdfunding, number one. Number two, who are they using still to this day, despite his cease and desist letters, to raise money? The Trumps.
And that's the best place that he can hurt them.
That say Donald Jr. would like you to give a gift for his father's birthday. I'm like, that didn't come from Don Jr. Hasn't been associated with RNC fundraising for 6 months.
Should I text him and ask him if that's true?
No,
right.
It's obviously false. They just
right.
But it shows they still don't appreciate that their old model is gone. This is like the New York Times, still shocked they can't control the news anymore. They don't understand that the real advantage And now this is still mostly on the congressmen and senators themselves, because they're the ones voting these people into positions of power. They still don't realize. I mean, we have always been governed by old people, and nothing's more an indicator of that than the Senate. I mean, look at how old these people are. So, I mean, that's part of it. They come from a different political generation that doesn't understand this isn't how politics is done anymore. This is like the Roman Senate, that kills Caesar and thinks that the Rome is going to celebrate him, and instead Rome turns on him. That the assassination of Caesar killed the Republic, not Caesar's rise. They have the same mindset. They don't understand what's happening in the world and in the political environment. I mean, they really thought they were going to be able to take Trump out using January 6th, completely discredit populism and never have to deal with it again. It was political assassination attempt number 364 against Trump and his supporters and populism. It utterly failed. And they still don't even appreciate the scope of that. And so they don't appreciate at any level. And McCarthy, people who don't know, I mean, McCarthy was always likely to go down a McConnell-like path, because just go back and look at the old photo of him and Paul Ryan on the cover of Young Republicans when they first came in.
Young guns.
Part of that same mindset, same mentality that has no popular base country. And increasingly, you need a popular base, because media is now, whether you have a popular base, because it's about independent media, not institutional media. It used to be, am I pleasing the powerful people? Because powerful people controlled the think tanks. Powerful people controlled the intelligence apparatus. Powerful people controlled the media. Powerful people controlled donations. So all you had to do was placate and please the donor class because of its indirect control of media and institutional power in D.C. and its control over campaign funds. That's no longer true, because the donor class is now working class and middle class and ordinary everyday people and retirees. That's who runs it. The technology has changed the game for independent media, social media, and fundraising, and the political apparatus still has no clue this has happened. And this is why we're at where we're at, where there's still a vacuum needing populist leaders, and still those populist leaders not filling it, because we have, just like legacy media doesn't get it as to why the rise of independent media will continue to surge and accelerate, the same is true of the legacy political class. They do not understand the world has changed. And some of this is reflected in candidates today. I mean, I've seen some candidates go out and hire the same political schmuck
people
to run their campaigns. It's like, if you're going to run for office out there and you have a single DC firm that you're paying money to, you're doing it wrong. If you look to what's worked, ignore what's failed, and do something independent. You should have nobody from DC and nobody with a long resume that you're paying a penny to, whether that's for database research, for mailings, for direct targeting, for political advertising, for public opinion polling, for press representation, any of it. If you have any of those people, you're doing it wrong.
And for the people who do try to go out and, say Marjorie Taylor Greene's a perfect example. They want to get rid of her. They want to ban her. She's a constant threat to lose her account. The president of the United States lost his Twitter account. Facebook announced he's bad for the United States. They'll keep him banned for another 2 years. We asked people about this cancel culture, given everything you might have heard about what is going on, which would you say comes closer to your view? And they say these bans are too often used to crush dissenting views, and they say it represents, and I use this strong language on purpose, because I wanted to know how many would make this jump, right? A grave threat to free speech rights. That versus they are used largely to ensure a civil society, and free speech should be limited. It's basically going to hurt someone's feelings, right? Only 23% of the country chose that, which is stunning. I don't know if it's up, but they did. And that gets crushed to, and again, unweighted 54% majority. So more than it will be more than 2-1, slightly more than 2-1 when weighted, say that these are not legitimate bans. These are attempts to crush dissenting views. And you can't get to majorities like that without almost universal approval on one side, and the middle being, on significantly on the side of those being crushed. The America First question, we don't use that term We simply say, on immigration, economic, and foreign policy, should the goal of U.S. policy be to put the needs of U.S. citizens ahead of U.S. allies and the global community, or should they put the needs of U.S. Allies and global community on par with U.S. citizens? So basically, what Trump was arguing, our government does not put, let's be real, they have not for decades put the needs of U.S. citizens. They put the needs of special interests, their allies, right? That earned exactly 14% support. America First is 86%. And when it's weighted, it will be close to 9 and 10. We have polling in blue districts where it's 9 and 10. So I know it's when weighted, it's going to be roughly there too. This is a major failure of the Republican Party. It's a major failure on branding and a major failure on messaging. Because if you don't know where you stand on this, there is obviously, a huge percentage of the electorate who will say that that's what policy should be the goal, that should be the goal of U.S. policy, but then vote for the candidate of the party who consistently doesn't do that. And that is a very simple argument to make, but it's one they can't make. Once America First got kind of tainted, you could have pivoted and made it that simple. I just said it. The goal of U.S. policy should be to put U.S. and I used sterile language. If I was a candidate running, I would say workers, families, right? I would use words like that. Words that are humanize who we're talking about here. Your own family, you work for a living, don't you? And then China, very close to Gallup. Who's the greatest as of now, right, today? Which one of the following nations would you consider to be the single greatest threat or single greatest enemy of the United States? Only we added, meaning which poses the greatest threat. Because enemy could be it's a bigger enemy, but maybe that's not you don't view that country to be the biggest threat. Let's see. Unsure got 11. None got 3.7. Other got 1.8. Iran got 4.7. North Korea only got 15.1. That's Donald Trump all day. Russia, 24%. China, about 40%. So when weighted, it'll probably be around 43 to 45, very close to Gallup. What the, man? WTF, man? The country hates them. The country doesn't like them. They view them as a threat. How could you not tie this country around the neck of your opposing party? It's very easy to do, especially now that we know what we know. The New York Times and those Fauci emails, the New York Times was just spitting Beijing talking points. I mean, and every Democrat was soaking it up, running with it. I mean, this isn't hard, right? I did read the morality versus policy thing. I mean, that should almost be in every Republican's speech. The media may make me out to be a horrible person, but I'm not even going to argue with any of that. I'll tell you this. I will keep my promises and I will put you first. That's it. End of story. Nice dumb speech. Adios. Go shake hands and talk to people and let them know who you are as a human being. This is like, Robert, this is not hard. But it's frustrating because, in California, the party out there, they're just Kevin McCarthy-esque. And they're still fighting over the same Orange County districts, surrounding area. These boundaries for the districts are going to change with the census, and they're going to be fighting for districts they can't keep, or it will be harder to keep, and they'll be ignoring districts that they can win, that they can absolutely flip. I name 2 of them right now, and these people are telling us, no, I don't support that. And what made me do this, looking at a state like California, the proposals, the propositions that just were on these, amendment this, amendment that, proposition this, proposition that, went down in flames in a supposedly liberal state. Like so many of the conservative positions won. So that tells you the Republican Party did a horrible job explaining to the voters of these districts who is the candidate for this, who is the candidate for that. So it is the old way of thinking. It doesn't matter if the voters view you like Kevin McCarthy. And when they hear Republican, they think Kevin McCarthy. They hear Republican, they think Mitch McConnell. It doesn't matter how much you raise, my friend. It doesn't matter how much you blanket the airways with your TV ads. If you don't change who you are to them, I mean as a person, Because we asked this question too. Why do you vote for the incumbent? Is it because there's no viable alternative? Or do you feel like this one represents your views, this one doesn't fight for you? Tell us why you vote for this person, even though it's not a D plus, 20 district. How come it's still a 20-point? How does this 20-point margin keep coming up? Republicans aren't viable to them. It's that simple. They are not viable. And when they think of them, they think of these people. That's who they associate. And ironically, in a place that's supposed to be so toxic for Donald Trump, they weren't even thinking that. Like, this is a vote for the House. I'm thinking of Kevin McCarthy, or whatever. I'm thinking about Republican House leaders that I see in front of the camera every day. Who steps to the microphone every day after Nancy Pelosi does and gives the daily press conference? Who steps to the microphone after Chuck Schumer does and gives the daily press conference? That's who they're seeing. So that's who they're associating. Till those people go, it's going to be incredibly hard, even with this ideological advantage, to make inroads with certain groups of voters. Do you support the Second Amendment, or you want to restrict it? 40 points, Robert. Almost 40 points. 35 points. Pro Second Amendment. How could this be? It's just a huge failure.
Oh yeah, I mean, and I think it's at multiple levels, because you have the legacy institutional actors who don't understand the world has shifted, and they need to shift their focus from donor class interest to popular class interest, and they just haven't figured that out yet. The second aspect is, Trump really hasn't stepped into the gap. He hasn't stepped into the gap at creating an alternative media infrastructure, hasn't created it at creating an alternative political infrastructure. And I think it was disappointing that Laura Trump is not running for the Senate in North Carolina. Disappointing that Donald Jr. apparently isn't running for anything either. I mean, the Kennedys knew they had to stay. If the Trump family was going to try to recreate the Kennedy family legacy, they needed to be stepping into the gap quickly. That's what the Kennedys did throughout the 50s and 60s. When you don't do that, your family fades pretty fast in terms of potential political influence. And I think that's sort of disappointing as well. So you don't have good populist voices being the face. Laura Trump would have been a natural face of operations. And I don't quite understand why she decided not. I mean, North Carolina Senate bid is as good a seat as you could get. So I don't quite understand the decision to step back from that. And the person they're talking about endorsing is not some overwhelming person. I think it's going to be up to, the guy who's stepping into the gap so far is Peter Thiel. So I think it's people like J.D. Vance and the rest who are going to have to step into that gap. But who knows where Trump will be? Because, I mean, again, we haven't seen a sophisticated operation at all in the political arena either, in terms of them going out. I mean, you, I, and some other people put Joe Kent on everybody's front burners, and he's doing a great job. He's doing a bang-up job in his district in Washington. That should be being done for a dozen plus races by people with more institutional influence than what we can do ourselves. And they're not. That they're slow to the table, very slow to the equation. So I think that's and then you have this third weakness of either playing around with corrupt insiders or crazy outsiders. I mean, look at like for Steve Bannon, I would quit wasting time with Mike Lindell at this point. I mean, I like Mike. A lot of great things to say about his life story. He's chasing an impossible story that's never going to come out. That's never going to turn out the way he wants. Dominion was always a patsy. How many times do we looked at the data?
There's
the machines
no reinstatement.
did not explain the outcome, folks. The machines were not the source of the problem. Mike Lindell is living in a fantasy land of fake news and information and bad lawyering. And when he's on Steve Bannon saying that Donald Trump thinks he's going to be president in August and that he thinks he's going to be, he's hurting the cause. Not helping the cause, hurting the cause, distracting it and derailing it from populist productivity. It's amazing how badly they took the bait on this. It's bad enough for Flynn to be wandering off saying ridiculous things. I mean, I get the media misportrayed it, but don't be comparing us to Myanmar. There's no need for that. This is not advisable. And so everybody on that
this is not advisable.
Quit wasting your time on crackpot theories that were meant to distract you, meant to derail you, meant to hurt the populist movement. Quit talking about it, quit thinking about it, quit obsessing over it. The audit is a positive step because it's showing how elections should operate, what information is there. Don't pretend and don't tell people that it's going to change the outcome of the election, because it's not. It's not. The audit cannot have that effect legally. It won't have that effect legally. Taking that path is just misleading people. Instead, say, this is the precedent we should set for the future. Find out what happened in the past. Find out what legal remedies we need now. And we should always be auditing the vote, because that's the public's right to have trust and transparency in the election process. But not this nonsense, filing ludicrous lawsuits that aren't going to go anywhere, wasting everybody's time, discrediting issues of elections by the negative association with this. I mean, he was talking about foreign Chinese on Steve Bannon a couple of days ago. Oh, it's to the commie foreign conspiracy. They didn't need that, folks. They stuffed the ballots the old-fashioned way. They changed the rules, sent out ballots everywhere, counted ballots they shouldn't have, canvassed them and counted them in a process they shouldn't have, let people vote that they shouldn't have if the rules were. That's all. They didn't need to do anything else, but they needed you distracted from that, chasing fantasies about machines that had nothing to do with the election outcome.
Man, well said. Because this is what, you got Maggie Haberman who runs that story, right? Then you have Charles Cook, who never had any inner access to Donald Trump, so I don't know how
review Charlie Cook.
Yeah, I mean, he couldn't stand them. He couldn't stand them. Just so everybody knows this, for him to say, oh, I can confirm this, I've spoken to an array of people, is BS. He has never had access to Trump's inner circle or the president or the former president, now that he's the former president. So that he owed people an actual name or names if he had somebody. He didn't. I'll tell you right. It's just, I don't believe that for a second. Just a few days before, people who are close to the president were saying he is the closest he has been since leaving office to leaning in and saying, okay, get the ball rolling, because he views it as nobody can win in 2024 and that the country is going to be in deep trouble. And he is thinking about this the way Donald Trump did in 2015. And so, I don't think I could put it in the hands of anybody else right now. Someone, Robert, who is thinking about running in 2024 does not expect themselves to be reinstated in August. So that didn't make sense to me off the jump. It doesn't make any sense. And then Maggie Haberman is a liar, a known liar. And here you have somebody who has no known ties to the man at all confirming the work of a known liar. So unnamed sources don't confirm unnamed sources, folks. It doesn't work that way. It's called information laundering and circular reporting. And it's a big no-no. Or it used to be, Robert. It used to be. Now we're in this age of, no ethics goes. And Jake Tapper is like, Charles Cook is confirming it. I mean, but then Mike Lindell trots out and makes it, it just, holy crap, they couldn't have designed it any better. They could not have designed it any better. Perfect timing for her to drop that story. And then nobody, will ever focus on something important, which is what I just said. How could you confirm unnamed sources with other unnamed sources? That's not legitimate journalism. And again, like I said, how could a man be gearing up, really, really considering, I may have to do this again in 2024 if he expects himself to be reinstated in August? It doesn't. Guys, why would he do it? You understand what I'm saying? Hello?
He's extremely pragmatic. I mean, when I talked to him just a week or two after the election.
Did he ever say that to you? Did he ever
No, it's just the opposite. He said, basically, we got a week or two, and if we don't get this in our favor within a week or two, it's done. So he knew by December he had given up on it. He was going to play out the string, because why not play out the string? But he knew he had no chance. He always knew he had no chance if he didn't win early, if he didn't get an early result. He knew that by the Supreme Court decision, that was do or die. Didn't get it, end of story, gone, finished. He had no naive illusions. This is all mythology that he had naive illusions. He had no such naive illusions about any of that. And his focus on this was to narrate a story to vindicate what happened, get back at the people who caused him difficulty, and then consider running again in 2024. So all these stories that Trump thinks this way are utter gibberish, utter nonsense.
It's nonsense.
As soon as it's Maggie Haberman and Charles Cook talking about it, it's false, because these people have no sources. They lied about him repeatedly. They hate Trump. They want to discredit Trump. Note, by the way, it was coincided with Pence's speech. This was. The idea was that Pence would replace Trump, that they could use January 6th as the pretext. That's why this story was leaked at the same time Pence is giving his speech, because the insiders still think that Mike Pence can be the establishment president in 2024 on the Republican side. They don't realize the day Pence did what he did, when he could have handled that much better, even if he took the same course of conduct, he was done. He was done. I mean, I was at the Hillsdale speech where a bunch of people were, they are your classic original Pence base. Yep. Older evangelical Christians, successful economically. That is your classic Pence base. And they were coming up to me, and their only question was not whether to ever support Pence again, because that was gone, was did I think Pence was in on it or not? When that's the question, Pence is done. Pence is finished. Pence has no future. He's gone. Maybe he could come back as a mayor at some small town in Indiana, but otherwise he is gone. He's listening to these advisors that are in a delusional land. Now, some people have been asking about DeSantis.
Oh, go ahead. I was just gonna say, just real quick, on Pence. Laura and I, just a few days before, we're 10 feet away from him, listening to him tell people, when we get to the Senate, we're gonna basically saying we're gonna storm the beach at Normandy. We're gonna have our day in the Senate. He told all these poor young American Republicans, Charlie Kirk's Turning Point USA, even before that. Which, by the way, I tweeted live. Here is what he's saying right now to a group of people. So he could have still taken the same course, but done it in a different way. And he led these people on, folks, all right? Just so everybody knows, he led them on, and they were stunned when it happened because he drops a letter, how many hours before? 12? Maybe? 12 hours before?
Oh, no, it was just an hour before.
And they were...
I mean, it was a sabotage. Now, I'd been telling everybody to expect Pence to sabotage. That if you knew who Pence really was... Just look at one of his high-ranking staff members who last week was on MSNBC attacking Trump and Trumpism and populism. That's who worked for him in the White House. That's who Pence was. He was always a traitor. Now, he's weak-kneed himself. He's mostly no-backbone Pence. But everybody around him was the never-Trump establishment. Pence was the reason why he got taken out initially. So all of that's going on. Yeah. So last week was supposed to be about regurgitating the January 6th story, getting how Trump is the source of all the problems and how Pence is the solution. And it just didn't work because nobody believes Maggie Haberman, nobody believes the National Review, and nobody cares about Mike Pence. Now, people have been saying that there'll be a race between DeSantis and Trump. If Trump wants the nomination, Trump has the nomination. There is no doubt about that. Something drastic would have to happen. But right now, if the race was held today, nobody can compete with Trump. Trump will crush.
Well, today, I'd agree with that. I mean, there's going to be people who like DeSantis that don't like Trump, or will take it because, look, I'm telling you, if he keeps this up, I mean, you know this in politics, 2 years is a long time, man. If he keeps this up, he is going to be like the most positioned person. But if Donald Trump runs, I don't see them hurling slime at each other.
DeSantis won't run against Trump.
He just won't run. That's right.
He's not politically. Look at his whole career. He does not make decisions like that. He doesn't make high-risk gambles like that. So that's why Trump's already leaking that if he runs, DeSantis will be his vice presidential choice.
Yeah.
So
and there's no other choice.
Now,
At this point, Robert, there's no other choice. There's no other choice.
Oh, yeah, I agree there. If Trump, because the South Dakota governor just torched her political career in one vote.
Yeah.
Because otherwise she would have probably bet on that ticket, or could have been. But if Trump doesn't run, DeSantis is definitely the front runner.
Yeah.
But what DeSantis needs to do, he's doing great on tech, did great on the lockdown, but 3 years from now, the lockdown's not going to have the same resonance it has right now. So he needs additional issues. Now, he's doing well on big tech, doing well on cultural issues, the trans issues, critical race theory, etc. But he needs to make more clear, if Trump doesn't run and he does, what his foreign policy positions are. Because prior to him being governor, it wasn't clear where he was on a lot of those issues.
That's true. I can see, and I've heard, and I can see, I think even today they're doing something. He's going to make China, he is going to make China the, what they are, which is the enemy. He is going to make China, they got to pay. They have to pay for what they've done, and they are the threat.
Maybe filing suit on behalf of the state of Florida.
That's right. Yeah, I hear that's. I
Something
think
like that. Find a way.
I think he's leaning
make
in that
yourself
direction.
news in the foreign policy arena. Find a way to make yourself news on immigration. The Biden administration is. They're even doing it in my hometown, Chattanooga. They're dropping off kids who aren't legally here in towns that don't even know they're there. And if he's doing that in Florida, maybe find a way on immigration to make your stand known and draw public attention. And whether it's speeches or something else on both trade and war. Now, being anti-China will solve a lot of those problems, but be clear on trade and war, because those were the two he was the shakiest on during his congressional days.
I agree. And China is a big answer to that. It really is, because then you can. It's so easy to say this
China
is where I am on foreign policy.
Trade today
China.
is China. That's all it is. Trump renegotiated NAFTA, all the rest.
It's all over.
Trade and China are synonymous.
Yeah, though that's all over. Even in the pre-2020 public polling we were doing, people are like, "Why are you asking us whether or not we support NAFTA?" Trump already handled that. So I don't really have to worry about that anymore. That is in the psyche. It will be issues going forward with China and how dominant they are, how dominant we should let them be, and what we're willing to do to stop that dominance. That's really what that's the future. He if he wouldn't, I just think he wouldn't. I'm with you on that. If Trump runs, I don't see him throwing slime. He ran against Putnam because he really did view Putnam to be a rhino, which he is. Adam Putnam, so he really viewed Adam Putnam to be a rhino hack. Yeah,
it was the right time. But DeSantis is not known for taking on the Trumps of the world. That's just political suicide.
No,
it would
dumb.
be, no reason to get crushed like that. So it'll be up to Trump what happens in 2024, and it'll be up to DeSantis how well he positions himself if Trump doesn't run. But I gotta hop off here. But
tell people where you can find. Yeah, we're over time here.
I will be over at the live chat at vivabarneslaw.locals.com. You can see it'll be at the top, pinned at the top of the board, and I'll be in and out of the live chat over the next half hour or so people can join that and have some fun.
Thanks for joining us as usual, Robert. We'll let you run. I'm going to take us out of here. We will be on What America Thinks on tomorrow, so don't forget to miss that. We'll talk more in detail about what we found with the public polling project, especially with the Wuhan lab leak. You guys got a first-hand glance at it. We will package it up, put it in a bow for them over at the Hill, and they can see where America stands on this, or what America thinks. This is overwhelming. Nobody believes the Wuhan bat story, wet market story anymore. And it's not true. So that's probably why they don't believe it. And we'll have a lot more too. I may just try to throw something in on Tuesday night if I can, instead of waiting for Wednesday on What Are the Odds. But let's see. Let's see how quick the rest of these people get their stuff submitted and gone, because there's a ton of other stuff in there. And it also gave me a ton of other ideas on what we could do for the next one. But we'll have Biden's approval. We'll have it all. Everything from the questionnaire, we'll have it. So if you want to be a part of these questionnaires, all right, then you have to sign up for the Locals community, peoplespundit.locals.com. You can help us build the survey. You can vote on what questions, or have a say on what questions we want to keep, what questions we want to don't, right? Like the UFO question, vote it out at the last minute. And we'll probably wind up asking it in the next one if there's more footage out. All right, but that's exactly what you'll get over there, so do so. I'm going to take us out of here. I'll leave you with our great theme song from the Bowen Band. Always a special thanks to them for letting us use the music. If you like the show, hit the little thumbs up on YouTube. And of course, if you like the videos on People's Pundit Daily, like the YouTube channel, follow along, subscribe, hit that notification bell. That'll let you know when we're going to go live. Again, all thanks for the likes, the shares, the follows, the contributions. We love you for it. And we'll see you again, 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time.
houses, clubs, and neon lights. I rock the people my way, working my way, coming back to you. Working my way, coming back. Take me home tonight, not wasting any time. Highway 95, engines on overdrive. From town to town, and in between, I see you in the morning light. New York, Boston, Philadelphia, LA, I still see your face. Buses roll, distance grows, but I remember you're just a dream away. Working my way, coming back to you. Working my way, coming back. Take me home tonight, not wasting any time. Highway 95, engines on overdrive. From town to town, and in between, I see you in the morning light. Take me home tonight, not wasting any time. Highway 95, engines on overdrive. From town to town, and in between, I see you in the morning light. Take me home tonight, not wasting any time. Highway 95, engines on overdrive. From town to town, and in between, I see you in the morning light. Take me home tonight, not wasting any time. Highway 95, engines on overdrive. From town to town, and in between.
Peace out, peeps.